who goes next. They say you've got a home for me. Home would be the land. Yeah. We're going somewhere south. That would be too much snow.
I don't want to send it off to the wrong place.
I don't know what she said, did I miss a link?
Yeah, I was thinking.
I did send it. We're doing this, but I didn't see the link. They're on the same class, so I would.
Yeah, except for her.
Hi. Hi, Coralie.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, certainly. Thank you for being here.
If you want to go ahead and introduce. Oh, wait, hold on.
Whenever you're ready, I'm ready.
Down your volume.
Okay, can I just get my screen? My screen sharing takes a second to share it. Can I get that set up before we go ahead?
Please do.
Okay. I think I just need you to enable me to share.
That would be Bobby.
Hold on, I'm trying to figure it out.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Bobby.
Sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah, leave it. I don't know who's got reverb, so I do got feedback. Everybody's muted. Okay, if you are not muted, you please feedback. Is it you're muted?
I think that includes you.
Got the registration link. Okay, go ahead and try. Coralie, is that your screen? Maybe we
Okay, can you see my screen?
We can, Coralie, and we can hear you. There's
Okay.
some alien interference from outer space going on somewhere else, but we can hear you just fine.
Okay, that's great. And just
Thanks, Bobby.
just to check, can you just see the screen without the presenter notes? So can you just see the slide with no presenter notes?
Probably we can set that up.
Oh no, that's great. I'd rather you didn't see the presenter notes. I just wanted to make sure you can just see the slide on the screen. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think everybody can set that up to get rid of the pictures if you want to.
Oh, no, just as long as you
people?
can just see the slide, that's perfect. I just wanted to make sure that my presenter notes weren't showing and that you just
Oh, your notes are not showing. I'm sorry. No,
perfect. Okay, thank you.
they're not. I'm sorry. I didn't understand what you were saying.
I'm sorry.
Are you ready to get going? Anyway, I'm going to tell you a little bit about this lovely woman named Coralie Palmer. She is the chair of the Indiana Native Plant Society Landscaping with Natives team and co-chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for INPS. She serves on the board of directors for the Indiana Wildlife Federation and is the Indiana Wildlife Federation representative and a diversity, equality, and inclusion member for the Indiana Plant Conservation Alliance. She's also a contributor to the podcast series, Horses for Future, communicating about sustainable land management. Coralie is from London, England. She's also lived in India, Egypt, and Australia. For the last 9 years, she's been in Indiana. Coralie has a bachelor's and master's degree in biological sciences from Oxford University with a focus on botany, zoology, and ecology, and a background in conservation, environmental education, and landscape design. My goodness, Coralie, I'm so impressed by you. She's worked for the Environmental Justice Foundation in London, focusing on wetland conservation, publishing research from Bangladesh and Vietnam, and since moving to the Hoosier State, studying the native plants and ecology of the Midwest has become a passion. She loves spending time traveling with her husband and 3 boys and visiting national parks in the US and her family home by the sea in beautiful Cornwall, England. Thank you, Coralie. If you tell us all about ecological landscapes, we'd be thrilled to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So first of all, thank you so much for the introduction, Vicky, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with all of you. So firstly, just a brief overview of what I'll be covering. Starting off, I'm just going to go over some background on the importance of biodiversity and ecosystem function and why it's so important that we landscape with native plants and try to incorporate ecological practices into our gardening. Then just a bit of an explanation of some of the key concepts for maximizing the ecological value of our landscapes. So controlling invasives, reducing lawn areas, species selection, and ecological landscape management. And some details on how you can incorporate these ideas to build your own wildlife habitat here in your Indiana gardens. And also just wanted to note that all of the photos used I took in my average size suburban garden in central Indiana. So you really don't need a lot of land to be able to create some really valuable habitat. So first up, why are native plants so important? And it really boils down to this key concept, biodiversity. So biodiversity is variety of life in a given place. The 4 main ways to measure biodiversity species or community. Endemic species, which are the species that occur in that area and nowhere else. And ecosystem diversity, which is the total number of ecosystems in a given area. But unfortunately, whichever one of these you choose to consider, the situation with regards to biodiversity really isn't looking great. Research from a very broad geographic range and across different species indicates a very clear trend. Biodiversity is in steep decline. So a global assessment published in 2019 found that the biodiversity is declining faster than at any time in human history. This assessment, with more than 350 contributing authors, analyzed more than 15,000 scientific publications, as well as a large body of indigenous and local knowledge, and it covered all regions of the world. The assessment found that around 1 million animal and plant species are now threatened with extinction, many within decades. As with climate change, humans are the main culprit in biodiversity loss, and the report found that 75% of the terrestrial environment is severely altered by human actions. The assessment also reported that the current rate of global species extinctions is tens to hundreds of times higher than the average over the last 10 million years. And very worryingly, this rate is accelerating. Meanwhile, a 2020 report by the Worldwide Fund for Nature found that global populations of mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and fish have suffered an average 2/3 decline in less than half a century, with an alarming average drop of 68% since 1970. So insect abundance, biomass, species richness, and range size are all declining. The number of insects has been reduced by 45% since 1974, while reported rates of annual decline in abundance estimated to be around 1 to 2%. Available evidence supports a tentative estimate of 10% of insect species being threatened with extinction. And insects are vital to life as we know it. They pollinate 90% of all flowering plants, and they're the primary means by which energy is transferred from plants to most other animals in the food web. They also play major roles in critical processes of decomposition and nutrient cycling. Here in the US, a 2019 assessment found staggering losses in North American bird populations, with an estimated net loss of 2.9 billion, that's billion with a B, breeding adults since 1970. So devastating losses were found among birds in every biome in the study. More than 90% of the losses, so more than 2.5 billion birds, were from just 12 families, including sparrows, blackbirds, warblers, and finches. And these population losses included many widespread and common species that may be disproportionately influential components of food webs and ecosystem function. So these numbers are very concerning and biodiversity is in decline. But what does this mean for us, and does it really matter? And the short answer is yes, it matters an awful lot. The loss of biodiversity affects us all. So a reduction in genetic diversity affects species' potential for adaptation, ongoing evolution, and survival. And this is becoming even more critical as fragile populations face increased pressures from climate change and loss of habitat through rapid development. Loss of individuals is in itself a tragedy, and loss of abundance of individuals can lead to species extinctions. Loss of each unique and intrinsically valuable species is irreparable. And then each species lost increases the risk of cascading effects, with the loss of interdependent species and the breakdown and loss of entire ecosystems. And that is really, really important, because ecosystems are incredibly complex. We have limited understanding of even the most well-studied species interactions, and there are countless others that we have little to no knowledge of at all. We just don't know where the breaking point for ecosystems are. So when we lose biodiversity, we destabilize these systems and we risk their collapse. Without functioning ecosystems, we lose the vital ecosystem services which support life, such as the provision of oxygen, food, and fresh water. So for many of us, the conservation of other species is in itself enough of an argument for action. But even for those who perhaps aren't as concerned with conservation of other species, we can also look at this from a very anthropocentric view. The loss of functioning ecosystems impacts not only our quality of life, but also threatens the very existence of life on Earth. Humans are completely dependent on ecosystem services provided by plants and animals, and biodiversity is critical for ensuring the stability of the ecosystems that provide these services. So this is rather brilliantly and succinctly described in E.O. Wilson's 1987 paper, The Little Things That Run the World, in which he states, "If invertebrates were to disappear, I doubt that the human species could last more than a few months." So the conservation of biodiversity really is critical. And this is where native plants come in, because native plant communities support a great deal more biodiversity than introduced plants. I know some of you might be familiar with Dr. Doug Tallamy's excellent work, and so will know, as he explains it so well, that this is mainly due to specialized relationships that have evolved between plants and insects, driven largely by the evolution of plant defenses to insect herbivory and insect adaptations to these. Around 90% of insect herbivores are diet or host plant specialists, so that they can only eat or live on plants that have developed a relationship with through evolutionary time. So while introduced plants can provide some ecosystem functions, There's almost always a loss in biodiversity when they're used in place of native plants. And again, for all of you who are familiar with Dr. Talamy's work, you'll know it's largely about the caterpillars. So figures from these two studies on which Dr. Talamy was a co-author really illustrate this clearly. One 2018 study found that there were 68% fewer caterpillar species, 91% fewer caterpillars, and 96% less caterpillar biomass in study areas with introduced plants compared to native hedgerows. Another study found that suburban yards dominated by introduced plants were 60% less likely to have breeding chickadees compared to primarily native landscapes. And this is really where all of us come in. So in his wonderful Half-Earth, E.O. Wilson argues that time is running out and we need to act quickly to stabilize the biosphere. He puts forth the argument that by saving or setting aside as natural reserve half of the Earth, we could stabilize 80% of its species. And this is an amazing goal and something that's wonderful to strive towards. However, achieving this, particularly with unpredictable and changing political will in different countries, can seem unattainable. The brilliance of Dr. Talamy's approach and the Homegrown National Park idea is that it takes the teachings and ethics of Aldo Leopold and E.O. Wilson and looks at how we can achieve their goals within the constraints of the world we find ourselves in. So looking at this situation as it is today, where, for example, in the US, the vast majority of land is under private ownership, Dr. Talamy doesn't diminish the critical role of public preserves, but argues that on their own, they'll just not be enough. So he argues that we need to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes. And in doing so, he expands both the opportunity and the responsibility for this necessary task of restoring ecological function to the land to all of us. And one of the main ways to do that is to use native plants in our landscaping. So what is encouraging is that, as he states, it empowers each of us and also shrinks the problem to something that might be manageable. With so many environmental concerns worldwide and so many of our plant and wildlife populations declining and facing increasing threats, using our wonderful diverse native plants and landscaping is a way we can all do something to really make a difference. So hopefully that helps to explain some of the reasons why it's so critical that we start to view our gardens as habitat. But I realize it can sometimes seem a little daunting or a little unclear how to actually do this. And I'm just really briefly going to run through some of the main considerations and key concepts that can really increase the ecological value of your landscape and your native plantings. So one of the really critical first steps is to identify and remove any invasive species. Invasive species are defined as non-native species whose introduction causes or may cause economic or environmental harm to human health. Invasive species are one of the greatest threats to natural habitats and are responsible for degrading and destroying thousands of acres of natural plant communities in Indiana. They displace native plants, eliminate food and cover for wildlife, and threaten rare plant and animal species. Control efforts for these invasive species are costing taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars each year. In some areas of the state, it's been estimated that over 80% of invasive woody species, like purple winter creeper, Asian bush honeysuckle, privet, and burning bush, come from landscape plantings. And unfortunately, some of the worst invasive plants are still being sold by nurseries. So you certainly want to remove any invasive species that are listed on the terrestrial plant rule, and really ideally, any also species designated as invasive by the Invasive Plant Advisory Committee. There is an excellent field guide, the Pocket Guide to Regulated Plants, which has photos and descriptions to identify the plants and information on how to tell them from similar looking native plants. And you can download a PDF of that from the INPS website. There's also some wonderful information available through the Indiana Invasives Initiative and the local SISMAs, and also on the INPS website. And just, sorry, I should have said at the beginning as well, before we came onto this, I emailed Vicky a list of resources and references that has all of these websites on. So sorry, I should have done that earlier, but hopefully that's with you now. And then the next consideration is really the area that you can plant in and add native plants to. So Dr. Talamy in the Homegrown National Park Call to Action is aiming for 20 million acres of native plantings in the US. This is the largest cooperative conservation project ever conceived or attempted, And it represents the area of approximately half of the green lawns of privately owned properties. So if you're able to reduce your lawn area, an area that's really ecologically not very valuable, by any amount, that's wonderful. Whether you're able to fully cut it in half or just extend your planted areas by a few feet, any amount can make a difference. You can also then register your land by zip code on the Homegrown National Park website, which is a great way to be inspired and see the Homegrown National Park growing in your area locally. And then the next consideration is really what to plant. And species selection really can make a very big difference. Species selection will influence the aesthetics, the maintenance, and the ecological value of your habitat. So recent research indicates that a few genera are really critical for local ecosystems, going above and beyond in terms of ecological productivity. And one 2020 study, which included over 12,000 butterfly and moth species and over 2,000 native plant genera, found that on average across the US, just 14% of local plant genera support more than 90% of Lepidoptera diversity. Moreover, the difference between the productivity of these keystone plants and other genera is huge. Keystone genera support orders of magnitude more Lepidoptera species than the majority of other local native plants. So this research really indicates that not all native plants are equivalent in terms of their contributions of energy flow through food webs and their support of interaction diversity. So planting these keystone native plants will have a disproportionately large impact on restoring biodiversity throughout the trophic levels and will help to create the most productive landscapes possible. Ideally, plants from these keystone genera will form the backbone of your plantings. So in 84% of counties in North America, an oak is the most powerful plant to plant. 10 plant genera are identified as outliers due to their disproportionately high values across all counties analyzed. So these are the 10 superstars. So you have Quercus, the oaks, Salix, which are the willows, Prunus, which is the cherries, plums, and peaches, Pinus, the pines, Populus, which are poplars, aspens, and cottonwoods, Betula, so birch, Vaccinium, cranberries and blueberries, Carya, so hickory, Acer, maples, and Malus, which are the apples and crab apples. And again, these are the native species within these genera that are the really valuable ones. And helpfully, there is an excellent plant finder tool developed by the National Wildlife Federation in collaboration with Dr. Talamy. You can put in your zip code and search for the highest value genera to Lepidoptera in your area. And the results rank the top genera in each category. So you have flowers and grasses, and then trees and shrubs for your zip code. And again, that link will be on the resources. And then with the herbaceous plants, for my zip code in central Indiana, the top 5 herbaceous plants come out as Solidago, so the goldenrods, Helianthus, the sunflowers, Fragaria, which are the strawberries, Eupatorium, so the bonesets and Joe Pye weeds, and Viola, which are the violets. And again, it might be slightly different for your zip code, but that plant finder tool is a really excellent way to find out what's really good in your area. So those keystone plants support very high numbers of Lepidoptera, so butterflies and moths, and so species and richness throughout the trophic levels of the food webs. But the intention isn't to limit or restrict your plantings to just these. Ideally, you want to increase plant diversity overall with the intentional inclusion of those keystone plants. And then the next big consideration is looking at what best supports some of our other insects. So some of the other pollinators, bees and wasps. I find it easiest to break this down really into 2 main areas. So firstly, you have those plants that support specialists. And planting for specialists can greatly increase the biodiversity supported by the habitat, as both specialist and generalist species can be supported. So, for example, many of our native bees specialize on particular plant family or genus when collecting pollen. And including plants from the genera that typically support the most specialists, together with the greatest diversity of native plants at the family level particularly, is a really strong strategy for trying to increase the ecological value of your landscapes. So Heather Home calls these plants that really play an important role in providing food, shelter, and nesting sites the powerhouse plants. and she has excellent free downloadable resources and plant lists on her website, which is pollinatorsnativeplants.com. And they're particularly excellent for native bees and wasps. The Xerxes Society also provide great information on endangered pollinators and on planting for pollinators. The other big consideration for pollinators is flowering phenology and ensuring that you're planting so that you have successional blooming period and floral resources for as long a season as you possibly can. So from early spring right through late fall. So in the spring in particular, this can be some of the woody species like this red bud. And we're really lucky here in Indiana to have some of the few remaining populations of rusty patch bumblebees. So considering floral resources that will support these populations, particularly early in the spring, is really important. So I'm sorry, that was a lot of information. Just to summarize some of that. So including keystone plants is critical for increasing the ecological value of your plantings. And including both plants that support high numbers of Lepidoptera and those that support specialist pollinators is really key. Additionally, plants that have a long bloom time or provide floral resources, particularly early or late in the season, and those that provide nesting and sheltering sites can be of very high value. And then you want to look at this list and you want to add in as much diversity as you can, particularly at the family level and genus level, as this really increases the potential support for as many specialists and may have quite significant positive impacts on some of the populations that specialize on the less commonly used plants. And so those guidelines can give you a really great idea of which plant families and genera will make the biggest ecological impact. And so a good next step then is to work out which species within those genera are native to your area. And there are a couple of really great tools to do this. We are very excited that a collaboration between the Indiana Native Plant Society and the Indiana Wildlife Federation has produced a truly excellent local plant finder tool. This is brand new. It was just launched a couple of months ago. So I think this is really an excellent addition. And I think one of the only plant finder tools that combines both ecological data with landscaping information. So it's particularly when you're considering things such as continuous bloom period, or you have a particular height or color that you're looking for, this can be really useful. And wonderfully for us, all of the species in this tool are native to Indiana, so there's no need to cross-reference with range maps. So the website is up on the screen, and again, this will be in the list of resources. The other great resource, if you want to look at the county level, is the Biota of North America program. So their North American Plant Atlas gives US county level species maps, which are really very comprehensive. So you can search by genus and see all the species in that genus that are native to your particular county. So that's a really detailed resource for those wanting to delve just a little bit deeper. And that is www.bonap.org. And then the next consideration is perhaps to prioritize some of the less common species or those that are of conservation concern here in Indiana to support the wildlife that depends on those fragile remaining populations. And the DNR have some great lists of the species of conservation concern on their website. So these guidelines can really help you find the species that will make the biggest impact ecologically. And then the excellent resources on the INPS landscaping website can really help you to be able to match the species with your site conditions and with your landscaping goals. So we have hundreds of wonderful native plant species here in Indiana, and choosing the ones to best suit your conditions and spaces will really help to make your habitats both ecologically valuable and enjoyable. So where possible, echoing native plant communities. So assessing what plant communities your property or area resembles. So for example, if it's a woodland or a water's edge or a prairie, together with the site conditions, so the soil, the light, moisture level, that is an excellent approach. And we have great resources on the INPS website listing species that would be found in natural communities in these various conditions. For other areas of your landscaping, the ecological value can still be a primary consideration, but form or function, such as a screening biohedge or a rain garden, or plant aesthetics might also be high on your list of priorities. So the wonderful thing about landscaping with native plants is that they can fulfill both roles. You can have any design or aesthetic. We have our wonderful tall grass prairie plants that look majestic in larger spaces, but we also have many native plant species that are smaller in stature or maybe better suited to more formal landscaping areas. Additionally, design tools and management can help give a more formal or careful look to areas of your native landscaping. So for example, using distinct edges, mowed paths through natural areas, placing seats or garden sculpture, using larger groups of species for impact and structure, or repeating patterns and colors and combinations of plants, and the use of plant labels and signs can really give a more formal look to a space. Techniques such as cutting back taller perennials like the monadas and goldenrods in early summer for shorter stature, and then cutting some earlier blooming species back after flowering to promote fresh growth can also be really effective. So we have, and we're currently in the process of putting more information and resources on these topics up on the INPS website. So please check back frequently. Additionally, there's an excellent presentation on the INPS YouTube channel that's entitled Beauty and the Beasties, Landscaping 101 for a Wildlife Friendly Garden. And that talk was given by Sarah Gray, who is one of our landscape designers on the team. And it goes into some wonderful detail on landscape design using native plants. So we're also, in our team, really interested to incorporate the latest scientific research into our planting plans wherever possible. So for example, the University of Kentucky study indicating that the layout of gardens strongly influences the extent to which milkweed plants are found and used by monarchs, we found very fascinating. The study found that monarch eggs and larvae were more abundant in experimental gardens where milkweed was evenly spaced in a corridor around the perimeter, surrounding the nectar plants and grasses, rather than in gardens in which milkweed plants were surrounded by or intermixed with the other plants. Additionally, significantly more eggs and larvae were found in monarch way station gardens where milkweeds were spatially isolated, as opposed to closely intermixed with non-host plants, and in gardens having 100-meter north-south access unimpeded by structures. So hopefully, if we can incorporate results such as these and other studies into our landscaping decisions, we can really maximize our contribution to conservation. And then there's the question of, do you have to have entirely native plants, or can you have introduced plants as well? So you don't have to have entirely native plants. You certainly don't want any plants that are invasive. And the best way to ensure that you don't have any invasive plants is to have natives. But you don't have to restrict yourselves just to native plants. However, the recent research indicates that there is a minimum of about 70% native plant biomass, and this seems to be a threshold level below which the probability of sustaining some local bird populations plummets to about 0. So really, having more than 70% of native plant biomass is your target. And then another consideration, which is possibly more controversial, especially in gardening circles, is the use of cultivars or nativars. So really, wherever possible, due to differences in their impacts on ecosystem services, biodiversity and gene flow, straight native species really are a safer option than the often more widely available nativars. So I know you're all master gardeners, so I'm sure you know that for example, with the coneflowers, Echinacea purpurea, white swan would be, or something of that nature would be a cultivar or nativar of the straight native species Echinacea purpurea. So I realize this is a controversial subject and something that's not necessarily accepted or popular, but variation in how nativars are produced and the traits selected for does complicate this issue, but from an ecological perspective, the use of straight native species really are preferable. While nativars may be more attractive for some gardeners for aesthetic reasons, they can have ecological costs. There are potential impacts on the ecosystems that native plant communities support, and sometimes on the wild native plant populations themselves. So I do have a lot more information on this area, I'd be happy to go into that kind of now if you'd like, or I can come back to it after if it's something that you are interested in. But yeah, I don't know if you want to weigh in that on that subject.
No, you certainly can explore that subject if you would like now, Coralie.
Okay.
I just want to let you know, honestly, this weighs on me like, I don't know what. The part of your talk, it weighs on me so heavily, but I have to remember that the small things that I have done over this year really can make an impact.
Absolutely.
And that's what I think is so important. And we've devoted our whole year of education, our monthly meeting educations for our group and for the public to our theme was our homegrown nature preserve. So of course we were shamelessly adopting Doug Tallamy's homegrown national park philosophies, but we've had talks about, we started out with supporting monarchs in a changing world. We've had invasive plant species, eradicating them. Then we went out into the nature preserve and had a weed wrangle at a local Thornwood Nature Preserve. We've had 2 ephemeral walks looking at what beautiful wildflowers can come when you eradicate the species. So we've just had a recent talk on rain gardens.
Okay.
So, and Saturday we're having a program we call Green Thumb, where we're going to talk about composting, cover crops, supporting pollinators over the winter, and native plant species, particularly planting trees in the fall. So we're with you on this. So wherever you want to take us, we'll be happy for you to take us. And if anybody has a question of what she's talked about so far, you can use the chat function, or if you'd like to speak, please do.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Well, I'll just delve into a bit of detail on this, and then happy to answer any questions at the end on it also. So with cultivars, they can have impacts on the ecosystem services and biodiversity. So many nativars have been selected primarily for ornamental traits. And research indicates that not all nativars are ecologically equivalent substitutions for the true straight native species. So the ecological roles can be altered by selection for flower size, abundance, color, shape, phenology, and these can all affect the quantity and quality and the accessibility of pollen and nectar. Also, selection for traits such as leaf color can alter plant chemistry, so potentially making the plant unrecognizable as a host or deterring herbivory. And then even where the trait being selected for may not appear to us to be ecologically significant, we're still learning about the cues that might be important for wildlife. So for example, a June 2020 paper indicates that hummingbirds can discriminate non-spectral colors, including UV, and that these are likely vital in their foraging. So even when we don't think we're affecting the color, we may well be. And then additionally, hybridization at the genetic level can uncouple trait combinations that influence pollinator foraging, and that isn't always apparent to us when we're just looking at a certain trait that we can see. And then there is the potential for genetic pollution and the issue of the lack of genetic variation. So for fragile native plant populations, both of these can be a concern. So unintended hybridization can lead to gene flow from nativars into wild populations. So as well as affecting ecosystem services, this can affect native population survival and contribute to species extinction in some cases. And then when nativars have been selected for vigor, hybridization is also concerning and may affect competitive interactions and community structure. Additionally, so many nativars are propagated clonally, so they have no genetic variation. And genetic diversity found within native plant populations is critical for their adaptability and ongoing evolution. So open pollinated or seed grown selections of nativars are preferable to nativars produced vegetatively, but information on nativar provenance is not always easily available. So Yes, even though this might not be a popular opinion, and there are exceptions, such as where nativars have been bred for disease resistance, such as to dogwood anthracnose. From an ecological viewpoint, straight native species really are a safer option overall. And then another aspect that should be carefully considered is provenance of seed and plants used. So neonicotinoids or neonics are a particularly prevalent class of insecticides and are very concerning. And some commercial nurseries and big box stores and seed suppliers do routinely treat the plants and seeds that they sell with neonics. The residue levels on ornamental plants have been found to far exceed lethal concentrations for honeybees and bumblebees. And while research also indicates that neonics can lead to changes in foraging behavior, reduce predator avoidance, delay development, and reduce reproduction in bees, even at very low residue levels. So these systemic insecticides can impact many benign and beneficial insects, and they can have impacts throughout the trophic levels. They can, a 2017 study found that they can dramatically reduce egg laying by queen bumblebees, which were 26% less likely to lay eggs after being exposed to neonics. And because they are systemic, they're absorbed into the plant. They can be present in pollen and nectar, making them toxic to pollinators that feed on them. And potentially, as they are long lasting, they can harm pollinators even when the initial application was made months before the bloom period. So wherever possible, please source plants and seeds that have not been treated with neonics. And also, I would really encourage you to use your buying power to influence the supply chain. So asking in local garden centres and bigger box stores for natives and asking about neonics and provenance can really help to influence their buying decisions. So please do ask if the plants or seeds have been treated. And again, the Xerxes Society have some excellent, very detailed information on this topic. And so once you've removed your invasives and reduced your lawn size and chosen which native species and sourced them neonic free, the next concept is ecological landscape management. And there are some really simple things that you can do to ensure that your landscape maintenance is more sustainable. So for example, waiting as long as possible in the spring to do the first mowing to avoid killing caterpillars and other overwintering creatures that are just emerging or yet to emerge. I know a lot of people have started to adopt no mow May, so you wait to do your first mowing until June. So if that's possible, that is wonderful. Setting mower heights as high as possible, so to no lower than 3 inches and preferably 4 inches or above. Avoiding mowing in the evenings can help reduce wildlife mortality and also help to reduce water consumption. Changing to less frequent mowing regimes and leaving no mow zones can make a big difference. And if you're mowing at a large area in particular, starting mowing in the middle of the area and moving out can give wildlife a chance to escape. And sometimes even setting the mower or other power tools going for just a few minutes prior to use can give warning to wildlife and give them time to flee. Leaving plants intact over winter makes a big difference. And the excellent advice from Heather Home is in spring to cut back at varying heights, so 6, 12 or 24 inches. And as you do that, you're creating sites for bees to move in as they emerge from the ground. So some of these bees come out of hibernation quite late, so some at the end of April or into May. And so doing this spread out throughout these spring months can create habitat for these bees as well. And then just leave these stems up. The ones that you leave for nest should be left up all the way through that year and not removed until late the following spring, or ideally just left to stay in situ until they decompose. And then creating caterpillar pupation sites under your trees. So more than 90% of the caterpillars do not pupate on their host plants, and most drop to the ground and find pupation sites in leaf litter under the soil. So where the area under trees is compacted, mortality can be very high. So if you plant your areas under your trees with ground cover and leave them with fallen leaf cover, and where possible with logs to rot, that can make a big difference. And then leaving the leaves. So fallen leaves not only act as an excellent mulch, they also provide excellent overwintering habitat for many insects. So leaving leaf litter on your beds and around the base of trees wherever possible can have a significant impact. In addition to reducing carbon emissions from leaf blowers and saving money on purchase mulch. So again, there's wonderful information at the Zerk Society on their Leave the Leaves campaign. And then the next main issue is lighting. So I know if you're familiar with Dr. Doug Tallamy's work, he covers this excellently in his books. So one of the biggest sources of insect decline, but one of the easiest to fix. So outdoor lights should be replaced with yellow LED bulbs where possible. Motion sensors should be used to reduce moth mortality. And where possible, shades can be fitted that direct the light down, so both increasing the effectiveness of the lighting and reducing the impact on insects. So other small steps that can make quite a big difference are installing window well covers to prevent small creatures from becoming trapped, installing water features with bubblers, and instead of large bee hotels, using smaller houses and leaving logs and stems intact and in situ. And then last, but very definitely not least in ecological landscape management, is avoiding or at least reducing chemical use, and particularly pesticide use. So this in itself is a very big topic, so not one to go into in great detail here, but there are a few key points. So pesticide use is really contrary to everything we are trying to achieve. Certainly any prophylactic use should be really avoided, and please consider using alternative methods if you're considering pesticides. We've already talked about a little bit about neonics, but also pyrethroid pesticides, which are widely used in mosquito control, are a real concern. So mosquito fogging kills insects indiscriminately, and the pyrethroid pesticides used can be highly toxic to bees. Research indicates that some pyrethroid insecticides can have toxic effects in humans. They can affect fertility, the immune system, cardiovascular system, hepatic metabolism, and enzymatic activity. So as a cheaper, safer, and more effective alternative, Dr. Tallamy advocates the use of mosquito dunks, so commercially available tablets containing larvicide. Also, frequent disposal of even small amounts of standing water can be very effective, particularly on smaller properties. And then native planting around pond edges can provide excellent habitat for natural predators of mosquitoes and mosquito larvae, so dragonflies, damselflies, birds and bats. And this can greatly help to reduce mosquito populations. So also, if you are considering using pesticides, it's worth remembering that evidence of herbivory indicates that a plant is actually contributing to the ecosystem and should be welcomed, and it does not indicate the need for insecticide use. So in a stable ecosystem with sufficient biodiversity, insect levels are kept largely in check by natural predators and parasitoids, including many of the birds that is such a welcome sight in our gardens. Alternatives to pesticides, such as companion planting and physical removal of non-native insects, can be really effective in these systems. It's also worth knowing that pesticide syndrome can occur with pesticide use. This is where unnecessary pesticide use can mean pesticide resistance and the elimination of natural predators, leading to a cycle of increased need for and reliance on pesticides. So really, there are a lot of reasons not to use them at all. And then with fertilizers, it's really worth knowing that fertilizer use is generally really unnecessary in areas of native plantings, and high nitrogen soils can actually favor non-native and invasive species. So given this, the pollution associated with fertilizer runoff into waterways, in addition to purchase and application costs, fertilizer use should be avoided as much as possible. Also, is the complex root systems of native plants can help to reduce runoff into waterways. Using native plants around your ponds can help to reduce any impacts from fertilizers that are being used on neighboring properties. So with the combination of this important role and their contribution to mosquito control through provision of habitat to mosquito predators, having native plants planted around retention and ornamental ponds can be extremely effective and also act as a bonus boost deterrent. And then finally, really starting a conversation with friends and neighbors about who a garden is really for. So we need a big cultural shift in our thinking about gardening. So as a society, we see gardens not just for people, where the primary focus is often aesthetics or fashion, but we consider them more in terms of ecosystem function. The key will be to try to make this way of gardening part of our culture and to try to make it more acceptable to people who view gardens in a very different light. So trying to make native plants and functioning ecosystems something that people can see as a thing of beauty, which they certainly can be, is an exciting challenge. And hopefully our landscapes can be beautiful, functioning, living ecosystems that contribute to the well-being of all the life that shares them. So thank you for your time. And I'm really excited that you might be keen to create your own wildlife habitat. And hopefully one of your steps online might be the INPS website, which is excellently maintained by Wendy Ford. There is already a lot of information on the site and more being added all the time. So hopefully that will really help you. And all of this material will be freely available, and any questions or feedback will be gladly received at this email at landscape@indiananativeplants.org. This will get through to myself and other members of our team. So, thank you.
Thank you for your astounding presentation, Coralie. I didn't have any questions via chat, but if anybody wants to unmute and ask questions, please do so now.
Hey, Coralie, this is Uma here. I had a question about, I think you were mentioning some 5 species of plants for central Indiana for your area. Could you run through that list again?
Oh, you're muted, Coralie.
Apologies, sorry. Okay, that helps if I'm not unmuted. Yeah, so the ones, so where the website that you can look up for those is nwf.org and then /native plant finder, and you can put in your zip code to find the ones in your area. It's probably very similar to where I am in central Indiana, and so the 5 top herbaceous plants for butterflies and moths were Solidago, so the goldenrods, Helianthus, so the sunflowers, Fragaria, so the native strawberries, Eupatorium, which includes bonesets and the Joe Pye weeds, and Viola, so the native violets.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't catch the third one, Coralie. What was the third one?
So the third one was Helianthus, so sunflowers. So things such as Helianthus, Helianthoides. Or there's a lot of I'm trying to remember how many. There is quite a few.
Yeah, no, the one after that, the one after Helianthus is one I'm not familiar with.
Oh, sorry. So that's Fragaria, or the native strawberry.
Gregaria. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks, Uma. Anyone else? Oh, wow. I want to thank you for addressing our group and giving us so much to think about. As I'm looking out of my window here, probably looking at invasives that I know I have to get rid of. I've got to part with the burning bushes.
Yeah, it's hard for sure.
Well, ours are so large now that they provide a break. So they're not so much ornamental anymore. It's just a function. And I've got to get my husband convinced of getting rid of that. I think he would like to give up a lot of our lawn. So that would be okay. And we do have native plants around the pond, but it doesn't look as pretty and neat and landscaped as the rest of the pond looks on our neighbors, but ours is better for ecology, I think. But anyway.
Yeah, and so we have, so with your burning bushes, we have on the INPS website, we have some wonderful resources that give native alternatives to those. So we have some really great native species that will provide the same function.
I know. Well, and I'm definitely going to get on that website and put in our zip code. We're just on the east side of Indianapolis, so we're probably going to share those top 5 with you.
Yeah, probably.
Well, if there are no further questions, I'll just thank you again, Coralie, and thanks everybody for attending.
Thank you.
So-
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you too. Bye.
Bye.
Darlene. Hi, it's Brenda Hayes. And I was just wondering, when we talked about the scholarships, is there someone that can take pictures of the arrangements or the display that have won the scholarships from us? Yeah. Okay. There we go. Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was wanting to know if we could get someone to take pictures of the arrangements or displays that receive the scholarship and show them at the meeting.
Yeah. Brenda, this is Teresa.
Yeah, I see you, Teresa.
Okay, they are already done. Yeah, I confirmed with Bobby here just that they are done. So we
Okay.
can make arrangements to get those to you.
All right, thank you.
Or whoever you were thinking you might want to get them to.
I was just wanting to see what our money went to support as far as scholarship.
I think what she was asking, at the next meeting, could we just show them
Oh, absolutely.
to everybody?
That would not be a problem. Did you have something else? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody, for attending. and for your questions. See you in the month.
You can send it to me and I'll forward it to
Concludes our meeting.
everybody. Okay, so it's our first, she'll forward it to me. Okay.
No.
Oh, good. All right, yeah.
No, you were not.
Okay, should have stayed on that.
Well, I noticed her voice kept changing. I thought she was getting hoarse. I don't know what it was, but it might have been terrible.
Perfect documents.
Yeah.
I could hear them.